Now recognizing the House Leader for the third party.
Thank you. Just a question with respect to the Insurance Vehicle Amendment Act. It's concerns being brought to us with respect to the changes that were made not working as they were intended. Despite the promises that the Act would improve care for victims of crashes, we're hearing many stories of the no-fault program leading to worse outcomes, ICBC adjusters going against the recommendations of medical professionals, and about issues of cyclists and pedestrians, especially those who might not have an ICBC insurance policy, getting the proper compensation. The ministry or the ICBC just rebated $395 million in individual rebates. How does the minister square the reality that the promise of the no-fault system that was brought in is not reconciling with the reality that we're facing on the ground, with giving such a large amount of money back, noting the fact that people are not receiving the compensation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'd have to disagree with the premise of the question. Enhanced care is working. It's working in terms of people getting the care they need faster, sooner, and for longer periods of time than they ever did under the old tort system, where you would often have to wait sometimes years for a tort to be heard in a court. The benefits they receive are for a lifetime if necessary. And I'll just give an example. If someone was injured under the old system in an accident that was their fault, the maximum benefits they would receive was $300,000. And if they were in a serious accident that left them, as a paraplegic, that's all they got to last the rest of their life. Now, under the enhanced care system, that care is there for as long as you need. At the same time, 96% of what's taken in or paid out is paid of the claimants is paid to the claimants. It wasn't that big before when you had the legal fees that were coming out. In terms of the rebate, ICBC is able to do that because not only are we now being able to meet the minimum capital test because of the solid investment performance, that we are then able to put back in the pockets of policyholders that $400 million in terms of a rebate, which they have paid into the corporation in the form of that has been generated for the corporation by investment income. So the system is working the way it's intended. Are there issues that come up with cases? Of course there will be. And that's why we've got the fairness officer in place. That's why there's the civil resolution process in place for people to be able to access. So all of those things are in place, and the system is working. Now, as I said yesterday in answer to a question, can it improve? Of course it can. Any system can improve. And ICBC wants to work and make sure that those improvements are taking place by constantly upgrading the skills and the training of its employees, and looking at changes that are taking place in terms of how car insurance is put in place, the kinds of care that people need, all of those things. But the system is doing what it's intended to do, and we think it's a significant improvement over what was in place before.
Member.
Thank you. And I don't have any further questions for ICBC. So I'm going to be switching gears. Thank you to the ICBC staff for hanging around for what amounts to a single question, but I appreciate it. Nice to see you. I do want to ask the Minister, in Bill 17 debate earlier this year, and then as followed up in question period, both the Minister, the Public Safety and Solicitor General, and the Minister of Environment indicated their willingness to implement accountability measures for the BC Conservation Officer Service. And as I understand it, either the Minister has to amend the Act to include it as a police service, or the Minister that's responsible for, and in fact, the head of the BC Conservation Service, as it's currently structured, needs to come and ask the Minister for Public Safety. So there were suggestions by both ministers that this project was going to happen. I'm wondering if the minister can provide a timeline when we can expect that for the public to be able to understand. I guess maybe I should ask this question first. Has the Minister of the Environment approached the Minister of Public Safety and requested the BC Conservation Service get the appropriate level of oversight, that the people of BC can expect the same level of protection, that the actually conservation officers can expect the same level of protection that other officers with unlimited appointments get? Has the Minister of Environment made that request? And if so, what's the timeline for implementation?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member. So what I can tell the member is that we are currently working with the Ministry of Environment on enhancing the independent oversight of conservation officers. We have policy and legal analysis are underway on regulatory options to apply independent oversight. The analysis includes consideration on the scope of the oversight that can be applied to special provincial constables. If a regulatory model is feasible, the ministry would look to introduce those regulations as soon as possible. As part of Phase 2 of the Policing and Public Safety Modernization Initiative, the ministry is exploring options for a new policing oversight scheme as recommended by the Special Committee. The analysis includes considering how independent oversight can be applied to officers along the law enforcement continuum, including the Conservation Officer Service. The legislation, as we talked about earlier, is looking at 2027. So it's a combination of, can we do what you're wanting to do by regulation? If so, we will try and do that as soon as possible. If we cannot do that, then it would be by the Phase 2 of the policing legislation.
Member.
Thank you. As I understood it, the BC Conservation Service could be added into, I can't remember the exact section of it at this point, but so that it could then fall under the regulation that we have, or the body that we have, the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner does the oversight. I'm going to I appreciate the answer and the response, and I recognize that this has been an issue that I've raised a number of times with both ministries, and I'm glad to hear that there's progress being made on it. I certainly hope that as soon as possible means as soon as possible, like very, very soon, because currently right now there's a lack of protection that I think the province of British Columbia carries a liability, quite a large liability currently, the way it's currently structured. I do want to, and just recognizing the space that we have here, and I do want to talk about another oversight issue that exists, if I may, here with respect to the CIRG, the Community Industry Response Group. I have a number of constituents who had interactions, let's just say, with the CIRG at Fairy Creek, and they've been going through the process, the RCMP process, to have their situation reviewed, and I've been copied in the correspondence or lack of correspondence, and I can just share with the minister, this is one of the most frustrating experiences I think that people can have with a police oversight. I mean, it is essentially not oversight. It is essentially just the RCMP investigating itself and putting the people who are making a complaint in basically a bureaucratic swamp. And so maybe just a comment from the minister, if he finds the RCMP, and in this case it's about the CIRG, but I guess that process is for the civilian complaints process is for any complaint against the RCMP. I'm just wondering if the minister feels that this is an adequate process, the way that it is playing out, where basically we've got the RCMP investigating itself and citizens who are engaged in that process just basically being spun around and no real information, no real clarity, and we are talking years down the road and still no resolution to the open files that exist.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member, so through you to the member. So, yeah, no, the member is correct around the CRCC, the Civilian Review Complaints Commission. It's federal. It's not provincial, but I can tell you that they are doing a review of the CIRG, and it's a review of the unit itself, and it's a systemic review, so that is underway. With respect to complaints, misconduct complaints against the RCMP, we don't, as a province, have jurisdiction because the RCMP is a federal entity, and as the member knows, they are overseen by the CRCC, that is one of the challenges that on that issue of accountability that member raises that we do have. But in terms of the CIRG, as he mentioned a moment ago in his question, there is a systemic review underway of that unit.
Member.
Thank you. This was, appreciate the response, thank you. And I think it was one of the factors, at least, that led me to weigh my voice in favor of that consensus report that we tabled back in 2022. And that was that the current policing structure in the province has two sets of oversight. We have a set of oversight that we control, and we have a set of oversight that somebody else somewhere else controls. And so perpetually we will have responses exactly as the minister just gave, which is, even though we have someone who's responsible for policing, the minister that's in front of me, in this province, we have a minister that also then can turn and say, well, that's federal. They provide the oversight. So I have a constituent here who has had an interaction with the police, and I'm not passing any judgment on what happened in that interaction. There was an interaction with the police. There is a process for oversight. The police were involved. The CIRG was involved based on provincial laws, right? So what we have is just this layering of bureaucracy that essentially allows, and the CIRG basically, or the CRCC basically, is in their correspondence back is taking the position, well, we're working through it. So we got complaints, legitimate complaints. The source of the contentious issue is as a result of provincial policy, and yet under the current structure that we have, we've got two sets of police oversight, independent to some extent, and a complete lack of independence. How is the minister going to reconcile the fact that we have these two systems in place for police oversight, depending on which police officer, even though they have the same appointments, even though they're constables, they're contracted they're the provincial police service. How does the minister reconcile having these two completely disparate systems that treat people totally different? One is independent and one completely lacks independence.
Minister. Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member through you, Honourable Chair, because the reality is we do have two policing agencies, municipal police and the RCMP, and one has a federal review process, and the other is provincial. And I fully understand what the member is saying. What I can tell you is, and this was obviously a concern raised by the all-party committee. So the Policing and Public Safety Modernization Initiative is looking at what options related to the expansion of the mandates of both the IAO and the OPCC we can do, and the ability to bring the RCMP under provincial oversight, and therefore improve the process for complainants, affected persons and families, and one of the key areas that means is ensuring that people are treated in a safe and culturally appropriate way. So there's work underway within the ministry on that phase 2. At the same time, it's also an issue that we continue to raise with Ottawa at the federal level about the challenges you have when you have the situation that the member described. And I know, so I was going to move the committee rise report progress and seek leave to sit again. I see, just looking at the member.
Excellent.
Now recognize the House Leader for the third party.
Thank you. And just want to follow up. I've got one more section of questions that I'll ask, but I want to follow up on a statement that the minister made in response to my last question prior to lunch, just around there being two policing agencies. We have one provincial police service, and we contract a portion of that out to the RCMP. The minister suggested that there was perhaps a pathway for bringing the RCMP under provincial oversight. That was in the response. The RCMP commissioner referred to that, I believe, as red under blue, which is something that is uniquely, well, perhaps the federal commissioner of the RCMP suggested recently that that would be very unique. Is there an example where, anywhere in the country, where the RCMP as a contracted service providing municipal policing services is under the oversight of a provincial arm's length civilian oversight?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. No, there's no example anywhere in the country at this point.
Member.
Thank you. One of the challenges with contracting a federal policing service is that they are subject to federal statutes. So the RCMP Act, we have our Police Act here in British Columbia. In order to achieve that, and you know, I'm not sure which one has prominence over the other, and maybe the minister can provide that in his response. What is required legally in order for this to exist, red under blue, where the RCMP is under the direction or the control of a provincial policing body, or of a other than through contract? Like, how does that legally work?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So I just want to, I fully understand the member's questions. I'm not changing the member's question, but that terminology of red over blue, blue over red pertains to another issue which I talked about yesterday, and I don't want to muddy the waters on that. But in terms of what we've been talking about, that discussion around in terms of oversight, there's no clear path at this point in terms of oversight. We have, as I've said, and we've in answer to your previous questions, if the RCMP contracted there, that oversight is provided by the CCRC. And then we've got the Police Act that deals with the municipal police forces, and that's the reality that we have now. The work that is underway is just at this point is analyzing, are there potential paths? Are there ways in which you could deal with that oversight issue? And it would most likely require a change of some sort in federal legislation, but it is work that we are underway and analyzing. Member.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. I don't mean to make waters any muddier than they already are. It's pretty muddy. I'm gonna move on. I would say that I guess I'm hopeful that this work is preceding a decision to adopt a provincial police service that was recommended through the Police Act Committee. These are the challenges, and I don't care to dig any deeper into them, but this just, I think, reveals one of the challenges that we face and that we confronted as a committee with determining whether or not it's better to go with your own provincial police service that you have full accountability and oversight for, or to contract a police service that is guided by another act that requires another, set of politicians to make decisions on. I just want to end this with some questions around missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people. As the minister knows, we've had several conversations, and I really do appreciate the openness that the minister has been with me as a member of the opposition in engaging this. We've talked about the really tragic part of the Canadian story about who we are, our identity, that is the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And there's been some recommendations made, and I've been critical of the amount that we've invested in this area. I've also been critical of the policing and some of the initial responses. As the minister knows, I've shared with him privately that there's nothing suspicious here before an investigation has even been undertaken, that we have policing services determining an outcome before even investigating that. There's been some recommendations with respect to maybe creating a special investigator, a special prosecutor to deal with cases in which missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people are involved. Can the minister talk about progress that's been made with respect to addressing this really unfortunate part of our identity as British Columbians and Canadians?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and through you to the member, and I appreciate the question. I know we have had those discussions, and let's put it this way, there remains a lot of work still to be done. But that being said, there has been a lot of work that's already been underway. So obviously, following the 2019 release of the final report, of National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in our province, we did release the path forward, the priorities and early strategies that reflect community-based priorities and strategies to deal and end the violence. In 2022, the Path Forward Community Fund was established to meet the need for Indigenous-led capacity building and safety planning. So to date, almost $11 million, well, $10.845 million has been distributed by the fund, which has supported 51 projects across the province. In 2023, the $10 million in the new sexual assault services were implemented, including 70 new programs, 22 of which are Indigenous focused. Healing projects were funded through the Civil Fortune Office grant program to a tune of $1.3 million. In a number of areas where I think both the member and I have talked about in the past around police standards. They have been developed regarding training for major case management, including murders and missing person cases where foul play is suspected, standards to promote unbiased policing were also implemented, and police standards on investigations of sexual assaults were approved in 2023 and are taking effect this year. By the end of the year, all police officers in the province will have taken provincially approved Indigenous cultural safety training, and all frontline officers and supervisors are expected to have taken provincially approved training on trauma-informed practice, as well as training on fair and impartial policing. So those are some of the things that have taken place. At the same time, we continue to press at the federal level in terms of implementation around recommendations, along with other provinces that we have been working on. And most recently, it was earlier this year at the FPT meeting in Ottawa.
Member.
Thank you. Appreciate the response. Last year, about this time, Carson Mackenzie Seaweed's body was found. Just sort of adjacent to some fields where my daughter and her cousins were playing soccer. And it was a soccer tournament, a youth soccer tournament going on. I was at the march in Vancouver, and her father spoke, a relative of hers, I should say, spoke at that event. It was, pretty moving and forceful speech, and it's very difficult for me to separate the different treatment that happens. The immediate jump to not much here, not really a lot of suspicious activity in this case. And I think the entire case of Carson is suspicious, but yet the policing found that not so. And so the last part of the minister's answer, I think, starts to get to some of these challenges, some of the, perhaps the way we see things, the way we're trained to see things, or the way that we have evolved to see things about our identity in this country, that missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people is part of our identity. We all carry it. We can try to run away from it, but we all carry it. It's a part of who it means. It's part of what it means to be Canadian, is to have this response. And I think it's important that we all feel uncomfortable about it, because the Indigenous communities, the families of Carson and the many, many, many others that is represented by this young person, in this question at least, they carry it. And I make decisions about my kid because of it. My kids because of it. So, in all of the responses that the minister just gave, there's not a lot there for investigations. And so I was asking about the question around, we just saw the minister stand up, and rightly so, and I got a chance to talk about it on CBC this week, about standing up a special unit to deal with gangs. We have identified a problem with gangs, and I then identified a solution, and then we've resourced it. Many weeks ago, many months ago, it was brought to the minister that we identified a problem. The investigations of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls usually start out pretty poorly. We've got a case, I think, where perhaps, other policing enforcement bodies need to come in and clean up messes that were created by one. So we've identified that there's this problem, but yet I still have not seen that response, the same response. Is there going to be a similar response to the gang task force that we created to a known problem that we are all responsible for in this province?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the question from the member, and through you. What I can tell the member is, just on this area of work that we have been discussing, of the investment of the $230 million into the provincial business line of RCMP officers, we're looking at the major crimes unit, and that would result in the North District 8 regular members and 13 regular members in the South District. That focus would very much be on being able to solve the kinds of cases the member has been talking about. We are also currently engaged in consultation with the establishment of a new major crime unit on Vancouver Island. The ministry will be engaging with Indigenous communities around the establishment of community navigator positions embedded within the proposed new unit. These positions will be designed to accommodate priorities identified by Indigenous communities that will help facilitate culturally safe interactions and the exchange of information between the RCMP and families and communities of suspected victims during ongoing investigations.
Member.
Thank you. I'll just ask this question, and then I'll be finished here. I think it's important, I think, to recognize the narrative around creating a special unit and naming it, and the message that it sends to the people that are now going to be investigated for it. The focus, and I respect the fact that there's investments going into major crimes, and no doubt the instances that I'm talking about here are definitely, well, they're major crimes, and they'll be found to be a major crime if there's a crime found. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to also jump to the end situation, although in many of these cases, most of these cases, they end up being major crimes. However, naming it as a priority of the government by creating a special, not only the investigation side of it for from the policing, but also then a special prosecutor, so that both through the investigation piece and then the prosecution piece, that people who are engaged in this behavior and targeting Indigenous women, girls, two-spirited people, know that there's a crew that's coming after them, and that's what they're focused on. not that they're focused on processing other major crimes, but that if this is the behavior that you're engaged in, you're going to be chased down. That's not been our experience, right? So that's the reason why I want to frame it in this context, that there be that name given to it, because I think the extent that we've seen it exist in our society, it's worth it.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and through you to the Chair. I know I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the comments and the observations. And I have no issue at all. I'm more than willing to take that away, but I appreciate the member raising it.